She said it like it was a compliment. Wrinkled and worthless, Vanessa told her friend on the phone, pausing only to giggle and sip her wine. I mean, she's sweet in her way, but, she's kind of just there. I stood on the other side of the pantry door, my hand still wrapped around the neck of the olive oil bottle I'd come to retrieve. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop. I was halfway through preparing the roast chicken, the one Vanessa had asked for specifically, when I realized we were out, but the second I heard my name, or rather the cruel substitute for it, I stayed still. The oil bottle was glass, and I could see the tremble in my fingers reflected on its surface. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Just listened, as my only daughter continued. She's always watching, always in the way. It's exhausting. I mean, I get it. She's old. But do we have to pretend she still matters? The friend on the phone said something muffled, something amused. Vanessa laughed again, louder this time, careless. I swear, if I end up like that, just put me in a home with cable and call it a mercy. I backed out of the pantry and returned to the kitchen. The scent of rosemary and lemon filled the air. The oven ticked softly as it heated. My feet felt heavier than they had moments before. I didn't confront her. I didn't throw the bottle. I didn't speak. I finished cooking the meal she requested. When she came into the kitchen half an hour later, barefoot and unbothered, she didn't even look at me. She scrolled through her phone and mumbled, "Smells good." That was my thank you. When you get to be my age, the sting doesn't come from the words themselves. It comes from the confirmation of something you already suspected, but never wanted to believe. Like finding mold behind the wallpaper you spent your life hanging just right. You know it's there, but peeling it back still hurts. That night, at dinner, I watched Vanessa chew in silence, completely unaware that I had heard everything. Her husband, Mark, droned on about a team meeting. The twins were holed up in their rooms again, one with headphones, the other with a gaming controller glued to his hands. No one asked about my day. No one noticed I barely touched my food. Afterward, I stood at the sink, washing dishes while everyone retreated upstairs, the way they always did. It was just me and the hum of the dishwasher, the clink of ceramic, and the faint, familiar throb behind my eyes. There was a time when she would have asked me to braid her hair before bed, a time when she'd cry on my lap about math tests or friends who left her out. I never let her believe she was worthless. The next morning, I woke early, the way I always do. Habit is stubborn that way. I folded laundry quietly in the den, sorting colors from whites, placing Mark's t-shirts and Vanessa's leggings into their rightful piles. I hesitated, only when I got to the old blue cardigan, the one my husband gave me for our 30th anniversary. She hated it, said it looked like a grandma blanket. That's exactly why I wore it. I kept it. Vanessa didn't come down until noon, hair curled, lips glossed, dressed like she was meeting someone far more important than me. She asked if I could watch the boys tonight. "We need a date night," she said, without waiting for a yes. I nodded. She kissed the air next to my cheek and left a faint perfume trail in the hallway as she walked out. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, just breathing, just trying not to feel it too deeply. By evening, the house was quiet again, save for the occasional thud from upstairs or laughter from a screen. I made mac and cheese the way the twins liked it and set their plates on the kitchen island. Neither said thank you. I sat alone on the back porch, a cup of lukewarm tea balanced on my knee. The sky was a dusky violet, clouds streaked like old memories across it. I watched as the lights came on in other houses. One window, 2 doors down, flickered with candlelight and shadows dancing behind it. A family gathered for dinner. Laughter rose faintly on the breeze. I remembered what that used to feel like. Later that night, as I tidied the kitchen for the second time, I opened the drawer where I kept my letters, the ones I never sent. One of them was to Vanessa, written 6 months after I moved in. I know you didn't expect me to stay this long. You probably said just for now, and meant it. I heard it in your voice. I stayed quiet because I wanted to be helpful. I wanted to belong, but I know when I'm not welcome. I just didn't think it would be you who'd remind me. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I was never going to give it to her, but somehow, having written it made me feel less invisible. I brushed my hair in the mirror before bed. Black streaks still ran through the gray. My skin, speckled with age spots, told the truth of my years. But my eyes were still mine. still sharp, still watching. I reached up and adjusted the heavy necklace that had once belonged to my mother. She'd always said, keep something that feels like armor. This necklace was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the cardigan Vanessa hated, and thought of all the things I had given. Not just money, or meals, or time, but forgiveness. Over and over again. Quiet forgiveness. But tonight, I began to wonder, what would it look like if I stopped? Vanessa doesn't remember much about the winter she was 8, but I do. She doesn't remember how I carried her in my arms through 6 inches of snow to get her to the clinic when she had pneumonia. She doesn't remember the nights I stayed awake, listening to her shallow breathing, terrified I might close my eyes and lose her. She doesn't remember the handwritten flashcards I made to help her read, or the long walks we took after her father left, when I pretended everything would be fine, even as I pawned my wedding ring for rent. But I remember everything. The morning after the letter went back in the drawer, I decided not to cook breakfast. It may seem like nothing to someone else, just a skipped meal. But for Vanessa, it was a quiet shift in the orbit she took for granted. She came downstairs around 10 hours, her voice chipper in a way that made me wonder if she'd even remembered her words from the night before. The same ones that scraped against the inside of my chest like a dull blade. "No eggs today?" she asked, peeking into the kitchen. I looked up from the paper. "Didn't feel like it." She blinked. "You always make eggs." I shrugged. "Guess I'm not feeling very useful this morning." She gave a short, confused laugh. "Okay then." Mark wasn't far behind, grumbling about his schedule, slamming drawers like breakfast would materialize if he just made enough noise. Neither of them offered to make anything themselves. After they left for work, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked out to the mailbox. A thin layer of frost still clung to the edges of the grass. I moved slowly, one hand holding the railing, the other resting near my hip, where the ache had begun, creeping in weeks ago. I hadn't said anything. I knew better than to complain. Inside the mailbox was a padded envelope. My name, handwritten. No return address. I brought it inside, opened it carefully, and found 2 things: a copy of the deposit slip for the $40,000 I gave Vanessa for IVF, and a card. The handwriting was unmistakably mine. My own thank you note to the clinic's billing team, dated 3 years ago. I had forgotten I had written it. That money never resulted in a child. Vanessa called it a failed round and stopped talking about it entirely, but seeing that slip again reminded me there had been no baby, no refund, and no apology for how it ended. Just silence. And assumption that I'd forget, that I wouldn't ask. In the afternoon, I dusted the bookshelves in the den. I passed by the framed photos: Vanessa as a toddler on a tricycle, me at her high school graduation, and the last picture I have of my mother, stern-faced, holding her prayer beads in one hand and a broom in the other. She used to say, "Give as if it cost you nothing, but remember the price." Back then I thought it was cryptic. Now I know it was a warning. The twins came home from school, around 4. One of them, Eli, left his backpack in the middle of the entryway and grunted something unintelligible before disappearing into his room. The other, Max, barely looked up from his phone. I said hello. Neither answered. I wanted to believe they were just being teenagers. But I remembered what Vanessa had said. She's just there. They were learning that posture from her. After dinner, I sat in the garage, where most of my boxes still remained from when I moved in. Vanessa never unpacked them, and neither did I. I think we both understood the terms: temporary help, extended indefinitely. I found the old metal cash box near the bottom of one stack. Inside there were receipts I had kept over the years, not because I needed them, but because they were all that was left of some of my sacrifices. One receipt was for her first car. I paid half down. She never mentioned it again after graduation. Another was for the down payment on their first condo. That one hurt. They moved out 6 months later because the energy wasn't right. I found a photo tucked between the receipts: Vanessa holding Eli in one arm, Max in the other. Her face was flushed, beaming. I had taken the photo. She had just gotten home from the hospital. I was in the background, in a robe, exhausted, barely visible. That's how it always was. I was there, but never centered. That night, I sat on the floor of the garage, with the box open and the receipts scattered around me like autumn leaves. The concrete was cold, and I felt the chill sink into my legs. But I didn't move. I needed to feel something other than resignation. I looked around at the unfinished drywall, the half-used paint cans, the old stroller still folded against the far wall. There were stories buried in all of it. Stories only I remembered. They were never framed, never posted, never thanked. I went back into the house and reheated the leftovers I'd made 3 nights ago, the kind Vanessa always said were too mushy when reheated. I ate them anyway. No one else wanted them. The house was too quiet again. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't felt loved here in years. Maybe not ever. I had mistaken usefulness for belonging, service for affection. But those aren't the same, are they? They'll keep taking as long as I keep giving, and the giving had made me disappear. Before bed, I unlocked the drawer again and took out the envelope I had tucked away the night before, but this time, I didn't put it back. I laid it flat on the nightstand. Then I picked up the notebook where I kept account numbers, dates, letters, my little ledger of survival. I added a new page. Feb 12. Vanessa called me wrinkled and worthless. Didn't flinch. Didn't deny it. Just wore it like a badge. Note: move forward with contingency plan. Contact Mr. Harlow, transfer to protected account. My handwriting was slower now, but deliberate. They'd forgotten I still had choices. They'd forgotten. I remembered everything. 3 days after I wrote in my ledger, I noticed my jewelry box had been moved. It sat half an inch to the left, just off-center from the linen runner I'd laid beneath it years ago. The lid was closed, but not latched the way I always left it. And inside, the velvet lining showed fresh pressure marks, imprints where my grandmother's brooch had once nestled, now empty. I checked again, then a third time, because the mind can play tricks when it's aching. But the brooch was gone. I didn't say anything. I walked into the kitchen and poured my tea, my fingers curling slowly around the handle. Vanessa was on a Zoom call in the living room, earbuds in, pacing barefoot like she was preparing for a TED Talk. I could hear her through the walls talking about scheduling, logistics, and setting boundaries. That word again, always so tidy on their tongues. A word that meant cutting off, more than it ever meant keeping peace. That night, I stood in the doorway to my room for longer than I should have, just staring at the jewelry box. I thought of the women who'd worn that brooch. My grandmother, my mother, then me. I had once imagined giving it to Vanessa, but now I couldn't even ask if she'd taken it. I knew she'd deny it, or say one of the boys must have knocked it loose while playing. But they didn't play near my room. They barely saw me. No, this wasn't an accident. It was an assumption that I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I wouldn't care. The following morning, I called the bank. I had opened an account there 10 years ago, just a modest savings buffer my husband and I started before he passed. It wasn't much, but it mattered to me. Security mattered to me. When the manager asked me to confirm recent activity, I held the phone a little tighter. 3 transfers, small, but consistent. Each one labeled household support. Were those authorized? He asked. I cleared my throat. Not by me. He paused. We have them on file as initiated from a joint access login, one associated with your daughter Vanessa D. Hale. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in like pebbles settling in a pond. Thank you, I said, and hung up. That evening, I tried to be civil. I really did. I made my baked lemon chicken, the one Vanessa used to beg for when she was in high school, and set the table neatly. Nothing extravagant. No speeches. I even lit a candle. When she came in, purse over her shoulder, she looked surprised. What's the occasion? Just dinner, I said, pulling out a chair for her. She sat. Mark didn't. He was already upstairs, claiming exhaustion. The boys didn't show either, just her and me, chewing through chicken that now tasted like chalk. Halfway through the meal, she asked, "Are you okay?" I looked up. Why wouldn't I be? You've been quiet lately. I took a breath. Is that a problem? She hesitated, fork in hand. No, well, you've seemed different. I smiled, though I could feel how tight it was. Maybe I'm just noticing things I hadn't before. She blinked, unsure whether to take it as a warning. She chose not to. Okay, well, thanks for dinner, she said, standing up with her half-finished plate. I've got to prep for a meeting. I watched her go. I didn't offer to clean up. Later that night, I found the brochure tucked between the couch cushions, Clear River Assisted Living Personalized Plans for the People You Love Most. I stared at it, flipping it open to see a smiling woman with perfectly brushed gray hair holding a cup of cocoa beside a man who looked like a grandfather from a cereal commercial. In the margin, someone had circled Memory Support Unit. The pen used, mine. The handwriting, Vanessa's. There it was, their plan: dress it up in fake warmth, give it a nice-sounding name, and push me into it while I was still healthy enough to fight. I went back to the garage and took out the file I'd started organizing. I added a new page: unauthorized transfers from personal account, missing heirloom brooch, memory care brochure, plan. They weren't waiting for me to decline, they were building a case for removal. Slowly, silently, like I wouldn't see it happening. But I did. I saw everything. The following afternoon, I found the boys in the kitchen, microwaving pizza rolls and talking about a game I didn't understand. Max gave me a sideways glance and said, "Mom says you're having trouble remembering stuff." I turned, slowly. "Does she?" He shrugged, unconcerned. "Do I seem forgetful to you?" He hesitated. "I don't know. You just mix stuff up sometimes. I cook your meals, I buy your toothpaste, I help with your school forms." Max looked uncomfortable. "I didn't mean..." "It's okay," I said softly. "You're just repeating what you hear." He turned back to his snack, and I stood there, motionless, while the microwave beeped behind him. That evening, I called my lawyer. Mr. Harlow had represented me for over 20 years. He remembered my husband. He'd attended our 40th wedding anniversary party and helped us prepare our estate documents long before they were needed. "Eleanor," he said kindly, "you sound tired." "I am," I said, "but I'm also ready. Do you want to come in?" "Yes," I said, "tomorrow, and I want to make some changes." "Understood," he replied. "I'll block out the morning." I didn't tell Vanessa I was going out the next day. I just set the alarm, laid out my jacket, and went to bed with my ledger open beside me. I woke up on my 72nd birthday to silence. No knock on the door, no scent of coffee brewing, no grandchild bouncing on my bed like they used to when they were small. The hallway was still, the kind of still that made you realize you'd stopped being a person in someone's life and started becoming a fixture. I sat up slowly, rubbing my knees before swinging them over the side of the bed. My bones ached, not from age, but from something deeper, something that couldn't be traced with an X-ray. I reached for the heavy necklace I always wore and fastened the clasp with hands that had steadied children through fevers, tied shoelaces, and packed countless lunches. No one would remember that today, not he. Downstairs, the kitchen was spotless. Vanessa's white quartz counters gleamed, not a dish out of place. I found a post-it note on the fridge. It read, "Back late, spat day with the girls. Boys have leftovers. Don't wait up." I stood there, rereading the looped handwriting. The 3 at the end didn't soften it. I checked the date. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't that they'd forgotten. It was that it didn't matter to them anymore. I made myself oatmeal, the kind with cinnamon and chopped apples, the kind I used to make for Vanessa when she came home from college, crying about grades and bad boyfriends. I sat at the small table in the breakfast nook, the sun pooling in from the glass doors behind me. Across the yard, a squirrel ran along the fence line. My phone buzzed once. It was from Diane, my neighbor from our old street. "Happy birthday, Eleanor. I still remember your carrot cake from '03. Miss your stories." I stared at that message for longer than I should have, then typed out a simple thank you. My hands shook slightly. Not from rage, not fury, not even bitterness. Just the cold understanding that I had allowed myself to become this invisible. Around midday, I went into the garage again, not because I needed anything, but because the rest of the house didn't feel like mine. It never had, really. The garage at least held my boxes, my handwriting on labels, a few cents from home preserved in old blankets and paperbacks. I opened the bin marked keepsakes, kitchen, and pulled out a faded birthday card from years ago. It was handmade. Vanessa had drawn a stick figure, me wearing a crown and holding a spatula. She must have been 7. I traced the crown with my thumb, wondering what had been erased in her over the years. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard Mark come home. "Hey," he called vaguely from the hallway. "Hello," I answered. He didn't ask where I was. He never did. Later, I heard the boys arguing, about Wi-Fi speed upstairs, then music blaring through Max's door. No one came down. No one peeked into the kitchen. No one asked if I was okay. They didn't know what today was. Or maybe they did and didn't care. I made a cup of tea and took it back to my room. I couldn't bear to sit at that kitchen table again. At 5, a knock came. Not on the bedroom door, on the front one. I answered, surprised to see a woman standing there, arms cradling a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. She was from the community center I used to volunteer at. Marsh. Hi, Miss Hale. I know it's been a while, she said softly. We remembered your birthday. One of the kids made you this. I took the box with hands that felt strangely light. Inside was a bundle of handmade cards. Crayon scrawls, stickers, scribbled messages that made no grammatical sense but brimmed with affection. One read, Miss E. I hope you have cake. You taught me how to spell apple. I still remember. I felt something pinch behind my ribs, not sadness, a kind of grieving that had nothing to do with death. Thank you, I whispered. This means more than I can say. Marcia smiled. You're missed. I know, I said. I miss me too. When she left, I sat back in my room and opened each card slowly. Each one was a thread back to a version of me that had mattered, that had a name and purpose and presence. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in months. But I felt something click in my chest. Like a gear long rusted finally shifting. Around 7, Vanessa returned. I heard her heels clack across the tile and the chirp of her phone connecting to Bluetooth. Then, laughter, her voice lifting easily as she told someone over the speaker, honestly, I needed today. That massage was life-changing. She passed my door and paused. Oh, Mom. Didn't see you. I looked up from the bed. Hello. She glanced at the box of cards beside me. What's that? Reminders. She tilted her head. Of what? That I was someone before I lived here. She blinked, thrown by the tone. Oh, well, okay. Glad you had a nice day. I nodded once. She disappeared down the hallway, calling out for Mark. DoorDash. Or Thai. I'm too tired to cook. I sat still for a long time after that. Then I reached under the bed and pulled out the envelope from Mr. Harlow, the draft of my revised will, still unsigned. I opened it. I thought about the house, the small amount of money still tucked away in CDs and mutual funds, the necklace around my neck, and the brooch that never came back. I thought about what legacy actually means. It's not who gets your stuff when you die. It's who stood by you while you lived. I picked up the pen and signed my name at the bottom. It felt good. Clean, like drawing a boundary without raising your voice. The morning after I signed the new will, I put on lipstick. Not out of vanity, not for them, just to remind myself that there was still a face behind the labor, behind the caregiving, behind the silence. I chose a deep plum shade, bold and unfamiliar, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see their mother or their housekeeper or their default emergency contact. I saw Eleanor Hale, a woman who'd once managed a school budget to the penny. A woman who knew how to get a toddler to eat spinach and a teenager to speak again after heartbreak. A woman who buried a husband, stayed upright, and taught other people's children with grace and grit long after retirement. They didn't remember that version of me, but I did. Mr. Harlow called at 10:14. Signed and received. He said, I've got it filed. You're locked in, and I went ahead and flagged the old documents as revoked. Thank you, I said, exhaling for what felt like the first time all morning. Need me to handle any notifications? Not yet, I replied. I want silence to do the talking first. He chuckled. Smart, you always were. That last sentence sat with me a moment longer than the others. After lunch, I went upstairs to clean. Not because anyone asked. Not because it was needed, but because it helped me think. As I gathered laundry from the boys' rooms, I found one of my old scarves, balled up in a corner, stained with something unidentifiable. I held it for a moment, thumb brushing the embroidered edge, hand-stitched by my mother the year she died. I'd loaned it to Vanessa during her pregnancy to comfort her. Now it was just trash. I folded it gently anyway and placed it in the laundry basket. Not because it deserved it, but because I did. In Vanessa's closet, I stumbled on a file box labeled House Admin. I wasn't snooping, I was cleaning the floor around it. But the box wasn't shut, all the way, and the edges of a familiar folder peeked out, cream-colored, with my name scrawled in her handwriting. Inside were documents I hadn't seen since my surgery 2 years ago: power of attorney papers, health directives, insurance details, things I'd signed under anesthesia fog and family pressure. But then I saw something else. A page marked with sticky notes and highlighter streaks. A draft of a senior living intake application, already partially filled in. My name was typed in clean Arial font under the section titled Applicant. Under Reason for Placement, she'd written, increasing confusion, memory issues, general cognitive decline. I stared at that line until the room blurred. This wasn't a safety net. This was a strategy. That evening, I sat in the kitchen, with my ledger open beside a cup of tea. The boys were gone at a friend's house. Mark was out late again. Vanessa was upstairs, probably calculating whether she could sneak in a weekend trip to the lake before school started back up for the boys. I didn't call her down. I didn't confront her. Instead, I copied the highlighted note from her application into my ledger, verbatim. I closed the notebook slowly. Then, I went into my room and took out the portable scanner I'd bought on a whim during the lockdown. I scanned every document from that folder, naming each file by date, subject, and who touched it. I uploaded them to a cloud folder only Mr. Harlow and I had access to. When I was done, I emailed him. Subject: contingency prep. They're not just planning, they've begun the paper trail. I've documented everything. Please review. His reply came 6 minutes later. Good. Keep calm. You're 2 steps ahead. Let me know when to initiate. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen island, slicing strawberries when Vanessa appeared, sipping coffee like it owed her rent. You okay, Mom? She asked, tone overly sweet. You've seemed serious lately. Just tired, I replied. But clear? She frowned. Clear? I met her eyes, clear about what's mine and what isn't. She blinked at that, her cup pausing mid-air. Okay, not sure what that means, but if something's bothering you— Nothing is bothering me, I interrupted. I've simply decided not to carry anything that doesn't belong to me anymore. A long silence stretched between us. Right, she said, turning back toward the fridge. Well, let me know if I can help. She closed the fridge with one hand and checked her reflection in the glass of the microwave with the other. I didn't answer her. Some truths don't need repeating. Later that day, I received a text from an unknown number. Hi, Mrs. Hale. This is Sarah from Willow Pines. We received an inquiry from your family regarding a potential placement. Are you still interested in scheduling a tour? I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, no, but thank you for confirming that they were. Then I forwarded the message to Mr. Harlow, along with the scanned application and a simple note. They've gone from theory to practice. His reply came within the hour. Understood. Let's flip the script. 3 days later, I began packing without boxes. Not because I was leaving in haste, but because I wanted to know what I would take if I left on my own terms. No screaming, no storming out, no tears to guilt them with. Just a woman reclaiming the pieces of herself, one drawer at a time. I started with the hall closet, where most of my things had been slowly absorbed into community storage. My winter coat was still shoved behind the boys' outgrown jackets. My gloves were buried beneath a bag of tangled holiday lights. I dusted off the coat sleeves and slipped them on. Still fit. A little snug in the shoulders. Maybe, but familiar. Upstairs, I stood in the guest room. My room, though no one called it that. I opened the dresser, empty except for the clothes I wore on rotation. I ran my fingers across the worn cotton and linen, each piece softened by age and years of being useful. Behind a stack of folded nightgowns, I found a small envelope I'd forgotten, one of my husband's last letters, written just weeks before he passed. His handwriting was shakier than usual. If anything ever makes you feel small in this world, remember, you built so much with so little. You never needed their permission. I folded it and slipped it into my notebook, heart steady. By afternoon, I had gathered what mattered: my photo albums, the good earrings, the scarf that had survived the wash of indifference, and 3 cookbooks filled with notes written in the margins. I placed them in neat stacks inside a large canvas tote. It was just symbolic for now. But symbols have power, and I needed to see my life in a shape I could carry. That evening, Vanessa knocked lightly on my door. Mom, Do you mind if we talk? I nodded without getting up. She came in, holding a glass of wine, looking like a woman trying to be gentle but unsure how. So listen, she began, leaning against the doorframe. Mark and I have been talking. The boys are getting older. The house is tight. Tight, I repeated. Not in a bad way, just space-wise. And with your hip giving you trouble. I never told you my hip was giving me trouble. She blinked. Well, it's just obvious, sometimes. I tilted my head. Obvious to who? Her mouth twitched. I'm just saying, it might be time to consider somewhere that has more support. I watched her. She didn't squirm, didn't flinch. She truly believed she was being helpful. And what would that look like? I asked calmly. There's a place near the community park, she said. It's not a home. You'd have your own room, your own kitchen, and they have nurses on call. Nurses. Just in case, you know? For when you forget to take your pills. You left the stove on last month. I was warming bread in the oven, I said quietly. I used the timer. She paused, visibly confused by my precision. You don't have to decide now, she added. Just think about it. I nodded slowly. I already have. She seemed relieved. Good, that's all I'm asking. Then she left. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't notice the packed tote resting beneath the window. The next morning, I sat in the garden. Not theirs. Mine. It was a 10 by 10 square plot I'd revived in their backyard, planted with lavender, basil, rosemary, and 2 small tomato plants. No one else touched it. No one asked about it. I liked it that way. I brought down a small wooden crate and filled it with clippings, tiny green victories I'd coaxed from the soil with patience and sweat. As I worked, a monarch butterfly landed on my wrist. I held still. It fanned its wings gently, then lifted off. That small moment felt more intimate than any word exchanged in that house in months. I had one more stop to make. At 3 o'clock, I took a car to the notary office where Mr. Harlow had arranged a quiet meeting with a trusted witness. I brought my signed documents, IDs, a sealed envelope marked in case of emergency, and the tote. It wasn't the final move, but it was a beginning. Inside, the office was quiet and smelled of lemon oil and paper. Mr. Harlow greeted me with a firm handshake. You sure you want to go this route? I'm sure, I said. Then we'll execute it. Today's timestamp will be your shield. I signed again, hand steady, eyes focused. No hesitation, not this time. When we were done, he slid the final file into a protective folder. Now you have control, he said. What comes next is entirely up to you. I didn't return to their house that night. Instead, I checked into a modest extended stay hotel across town. It had a kitchenette, decent water pressure, and a window that faced the west, where sunsets weren't blocked by vinyl fencing and cold shoulders. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, looking at the items I'd carried. Each one was light in weight, but heavy in meaning. My life had never been extravagant, but it had been full of service, full of heart. Now it was full of something else. Intention. I sent one final message before bed to Vanessa. Don't worry about dinner tomorrow. I won't be there. I've decided to give you the space you said you needed. I didn't elaborate. I didn't sign it. Love, Mom. She'd have to sit with the silence and wonder what it meant. It was the most honest communication we'd had in years. I didn't sleep much that first night at the hotel. It wasn't the bed. It was better than the lumpy guest mattress back at Vanessa's. And it wasn't fear. I wasn't afraid. What kept me up was the weight of the quiet, the kind that presses against your ears until your thoughts ring louder than any clock ticking. I lay still, the city beyond the window humming faintly. For the first time in years, no one knew where I was, unless I told them. That was freedom and loneliness, wrapped in the same blanket. By mid-morning, I made myself oatmeal on the little stovetop and sliced a banana over it with a dull butter knife. The act was ordinary. The silence around it was not. There were no slamming cabinet doors, no sarcastic remarks about carbs, no boys arguing about Wi-Fi. Just me, chewing slowly, thinking clearly. At 9:43, my phone lit up with a text. Vanessa, where are you? Nothing more, no greeting, no punctuation. I stared at the screen and then turned it face down. Let her sit in the confusion for once. Later, I went for a walk. The hotel was next to a strip mall, and behind it, a small trail wound through a patch of woods. The trees were bare this time of year, their branches clawing upward like hands in prayer or protest. I couldn't tell which. I took the trail slow, letting the gravel crunch beneath my shoes and the cold remind me I was alive. Halfway through, I passed a bench and sat down. A couple jogged by, lost in their earbuds and each other. I envied them for a moment, not their youth, but their belonging, their togetherness. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my ledger. I wrote a single line. Today I went missing on purpose. Back at the hotel, there were 3 missed calls and a voicemail. Vanessa's voice was clipped, too bright. Mom, listen, we just want to make sure you're okay. I mean, you didn't say anything, and the boys are a little weirded out. You can't just leave like that. Just call me, please. No apology, no concern beyond the optics. I deleted the message and opened my email instead. Mr. Harlow had replied. Let me know if you're ready for phase 2. No rush, Eleanor. You've already taken the hardest step. I hovered over the keyboard, then typed, let's begin. That afternoon, I visited a small library near the hotel. It had the warmth I missed. Real warmth, not manufactured cheer. I checked out a few books, then sat by a corner window with one of them. A room of one's own. Virginia Woolf once wrote that a woman must have money and a room of her own to write fiction. But I wasn't writing fiction, I was rewriting truth. On the second night, I finally slept. I dreamed of a younger me. Hair piled high, lipstick dark and unapologetic, standing in front of a class full of restless students. I was speaking, and they were listening. Their faces changed over time, but my voice stayed steady. When I woke, I cried quietly, not for the years lost, but because I remembered who I was before they decided who I was allowed to be. The next day, Vanessa emailed, "You've made your point. Can we please talk face to face? I don't want to do this over text." That was the closest she'd come to accountability. I didn't answer right away. I let it breathe, let her feel the echo of every time she left my words hanging in a room, and walked away. By evening I replied, "Meet me tomorrow at the library cafe at 10. Come along." She arrived 5 minutes late, clutching her purse like it might fly away. Her heels clicked across the tile as she scanned the room, found me, then smiled, hesitantly. "Mom." I nodded, gesturing to the seat across from me. She sat, adjusting her coat, her eyes flicking over the books on my table. "You look different," she said. "I feel different." She bit her lip. "Listen, I know things got tense." "Tense?" I raised an eyebrow. She sighed. "Okay. Unkind." I was stressed. I didn't realize how invisible you felt. "Invisible wasn't the problem," I said calmly. "It was being erased." She flinched. "I'm not asking you to fix it," I added. "I'm telling you I'm done pretending it didn't happen." Vanessa swallowed hard. "So what now?" I looked at her, and for once I didn't see the child I'd protected. I saw a woman struggling to grasp that her mother had boundaries and a spine. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I'm not angry. I'm just finished." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I thought I was helping," she whispered. "You were helping yourself," I replied, and assuming I'd stay quiet. The silence, after that, was heavy, but not unbearable. After she left, I sat at the table for a while longer, sipping the last of my tea. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt solid in my chair, known to myself, no longer performing usefulness for scraps of affection. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Today I spoke plainly and was not punished for it." That is a kind of freedom, too. The day after meeting Vanessa, I returned to the community center for the first time in over a year. The woman at the front desk blinked when she saw me. "Mrs. Hale?" she said, rising. "We thought you moved." "I did," I replied, tucking my notebook under my arm. "But I'm back, at least for now." She led me down the hallway, where walls were covered in children's artwork and hand-painted tiles, many of which bore names I still remembered: Luis, Nika, Darius, Alma. My fingers brushed one tile gently, pink with a crooked sun and a scrawled signature. "Ellie taught me how to be brave." I stood there for a beat too long, then walked into the main room, where 24 folding chairs formed a wide circle. I didn't ask for permission. I just sat down and waited. The group was mostly younger this time, New parents, a few volunteers, one older man with a cane. When the session began, someone asked if I was leading it. No, I said, smiling faintly. I'm just returning to listen. A woman named Patrice, maybe 35, shared about being exhausted, juggling work, a toddler and her mother, who had moved in after surgery. Her voice cracked once, but she kept talking, unashamed. I'm scared I'm turning into someone resentful, she said. I could have responded with a polished phrase, a tidy lesson, but I didn't. I just said, that's how it starts. Quietly, you don't notice until the bitterness gets comfortable. She looked at me like I'd cracked something open, not in her, but for her. When the session ended, several people approached me, one by one. One man asked if I'd come back next week. A teenager shyly asked if I'd look over her college essay. I gave no promises, only presence. Afterward, I sat on the bench outside the center, warmed by the low afternoon sun, and for the first time in months, I felt useful without being used. That night, I returned to the hotel and opened the sealed envelope from Mr. Harlow, the final will, stamped and ready. I reread it line by line, making sure every detail aligned with my values, not just my emotions. Vanessa was still listed, but differently. Instead of the house and investments, she would receive a letter, a detailed record of her choices, paired with receipts and photographs, and copies of documents she had once hoped would disappear in my silence. I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. But I would not beg for it. The bulk of my estate was earmarked for the community center. The rest, my personal items, my journals, my necklace, would go to a scholarship fund in my name for women over 50, returning to education. 'Cause sometimes it's not the young who need second chances, it's the women who were told their chances expired quietly, without ceremony. I added a final note to the ledger. Wealth is not what you leave behind. It's who remembers why you left it. 2 days later, I met Mr. Harlow at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He handed me a small box. What's this? I asked. From your husband, he said. He gave it to me years ago, with instructions to deliver it after you finalized your estate. I opened the box slowly. Inside was a folded note and a simple gold band engraved with the words, "All you gave, you now deserve." Tears didn't come immediately. They arrived in layers behind my eyes, in my throat, down my chest. I breathed through them, letting the weight settle without drowning. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded. He knew you'd find your way. On my walk back, I passed a consignment bookstore. In the window was a small sign. Volunteers wanted mentorship and story hours. I stepped inside. The smell of old paper and cedar greeted me. A young man behind the counter looked up. Can I help you? Yes, I said. I think you can. The following week, I began reading aloud to a group of children every Thursday afternoon. I chose books with older protagonists, wise witches, brave grandmothers, grumpy mentors. I gave them voices. I made the children laugh. One little girl named May said, "You remind me of my Lola. She tells good stories too." That's the best thing anyone said to me in a long time, I replied. One afternoon after story hour, I received a message from Vanessa. I found the file you left in your desk drawer at the house. Is that the real will? Is this final? I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang in the air like an invitation she had to earn. Hours later, I replied, "It's real, but what you do next decides what remains final." That night, I went to the rooftop of the hotel, where guests rarely ventured. The sky was clear, stars sharp above the low hum of traffic. I brought my ledger and read from it quietly, like scripture. It had become more than a log. It was my record, my reckoning, my reminder. I traced the last line I wrote. Inheritance is not just money. It is memory, dignity, voice. And now, it is mine again. The mornings came more gently now. There was no chaos, no clattering bowls, no barking voices, just the low hum of the hotel heater and the rustle of pages as I read through my old journals over breakfast. It felt like piecing together a mosaic, the kind that had been smashed quietly across years and swept under rugs labeled family duty or you're overreacting. But I wasn't reacting anymore. I was reflecting and choosing. That Tuesday, I stopped by the consignment bookstore, where I now volunteered. I wasn't due for a reading, but I liked the space. It had warmth, without pretense. Mr. Santos, the elderly owner with more bookmarks than teeth, handed me a mug of green tea the moment I walked in. "Letter came for you," he said, motioning to the counter. No return address, but the handwriting looked shaken. I opened it slowly. It was from Vanessa. "I didn't realize how much of you I stopped seeing. Maybe I never really saw you clearly at all. If there's any part of you left that still wants to be a mother to me, I'd like to know her again. If not, I'll understand." There was no manipulation in her words, no guilt-riddled hooks, just uncertainty. That was new. I folded the letter and tucked it into my notebook, beside the old letter from my husband. Their voices sat side by side now. Two weights, one steady, one tentative. That afternoon, I sat in the corner of the library's reading room, watching a girl named Zoe, 10 years old, half curious, half shy, practice reading aloud beside me. She fumbled a word, paused, and looked at me, nervous. "You don't have to rush," I said gently. "The story isn't going anywhere. Neither am I." She nodded, cheeks pink, and continued. When we finished the chapter, she looked at me and asked, "Were you always this patient?" "No," I said truthfully. "But I earned it." That night, back at the hotel, I went through the tote I had packed weeks ago. I laid each item out on the bed like an altar: the photo albums, the cookbooks, the scarf, the gold ring from my husband, my journals. I added the letter from Vanessa. Then I closed the tote and zipped it shut, not as a goodbye but as a choice. These were the pieces I would carry forward. Not all of them were painless, but they were mine. In the morning, I visited a tailor. I brought in a long wool coat I hadn't worn in years, a soft midnight blue, elegant, but neglected. I asked her to take it in, adjust the sleeves and reinforce the seams. "This coat deserves another chapter," I told her. The tailor, a woman about my age, with weathered hands and kind eyes, smiled. "So do you." Later, I walked to the courthouse, not to sue, not to plead, just to file a name update for my estate's foundation. The Hale Renewal Fund. Not the Eleanor Fund. Not a legacy wrapped in my image, but in my growth. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Renewal Fund? For women who outgrew what the world expected from them?" I said. She smiled faintly and stamped the form. Back at the hotel that evening, I found a message from Mr. Harlow. "The Hale Renewal Fund is official. We've secured the first donor match, anonymous but generous. Seems your idea's already working." I sat down slowly and let the meaning sink in. This was no longer just about what had been taken from me. It was about what I was building. The next morning, I saw Mark. I hadn't expected to. I was walking down Main Street with a reusable bag of groceries when I spotted him leaving a pharmacy. He looked older than I remembered. Worn, his shoulders slouched with something heavier than fatigue. He spotted me too. "Mom," he said, stepping forward. "Is it really you?" I stopped. "It is." He hesitated. "You look good." "I feel good," I replied. He stopped himself, glanced at the bag in my hand. "You need a ride somewhere?" "No, thank you," I said. "I like the walk." He nodded, hands deep in his pockets. "Vanessa's been different since you left. Quieter. The boys ask about you. They know where I am. She told them you were taking time for yourself, said you'd come back if you wanted to." I considered that. It was strange, being granted the freedom that had always been mine. "I don't think I'll be back," I said, "but I might visit, when it's mutual, not out of obligation." He nodded again. "That's fair." And for the first time in years, we parted without tension, just understanding. That evening, I returned to the rooftop. I brought no books, no tea, no pen, just myself. The city below shimmered, 1,000 stories unfolding, none of them mine, and yet all of them echoed something I'd known: disappointment, resilience, clarity, peace. I stood at the edge, not dangerously close, but close enough to feel the wind stir my coat like a whisper. Then I took a single deep breath, let it fill every corner of me, and smiled. It wasn't the past I was leaving behind. It was the weight of waiting to be seen. The next Saturday arrived with no plans attached to it. For most of my life, weekends were a blur of logistics: laundry loads, grocery runs, school drop-offs, potluck obligations, reminders to take medicine, drive someone to practice, or remind someone to call, the kind of busyness that blots out reflection like too much sun on a windshield. But this Saturday was quiet. I brewed my tea and sat on the hotel bed with the windows wide open, letting the morning breeze play with the edge of the curtains. It carried the scent of something blooming down the block, jasmine maybe. No one needed anything from me, and for the first time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a gift. I went to the park after breakfast, the one near the trail where the trees now wore early spring like hesitant promises. I sat on a bench beneath a blooming dogwood and watched children chase each other across the grass while older couples walked in slow tandem. A woman sat beside me at one point, gray curls piled high, a sun hat tilted slightly. We didn't speak for several minutes, just watched the same world together. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "I thought I'd miss being indispensable. Turns out I was just tired." I laughed before I even realized it. Exactly. She turned to look at me, her eyes soft. "Grandkids?" "No," I said. "Not today." She nodded, satisfied. "It's a good day to just belong to yourself." It was. Later, I wandered through a weekend flea market. Booths lined the sidewalk, spilling vintage earrings, mismatched teacups, and forgotten hardcover books onto folding tables and picnic blankets. I wasn't looking for anything, but I let myself linger. At one stall, a carved wooden frame caught my attention. The carving wasn't perfect, slightly uneven, one edge smoothed too far, but it had heart. I picked it up. The vendor smiled. "Local artist. She's in her 70s. Took it up after retiring from her job as a cleaning supervisor." "She taught herself?" I asked, turning the frame over gently. She said learning late meant she wasn't burdened by the need to impress anyone. I bought it. Not because I needed it, but because I knew exactly what she meant. Back at the hotel, I slipped an old photo into the frame, one of me and Richard, taken when we were barely into our 40s. I looked unfinished in it. Not unformed, but unclaimed. Still stretching toward who I was supposed to be. I set the frame on the bedside table beside my ledger. Later, I added a line. "Even if they never see the whole picture, I still get to frame it." In the evening, the hotel lobby was unusually busy. A wedding party had checked in, young faces in formal wear, flitting about with nervous joy. I passed through quietly, smiling at a flower girl who dropped her basket and scrambled after plastic petals. One of the groomsmen, barely out of his 20s, held the elevator for me. "You look elegant," he said kindly. "I'm wearing house shoes," I replied with a dry smile. He grinned. "Still, you carry yourself like someone who once had to keep everything from falling apart." I stepped into the elevator. "That's exactly right." He didn't ask more, and I didn't need to explain. That night, I received an unexpected call. Not from Vanessa. From Leo. Leo was my godson, or had been, once. His mother, my best friend in my 30s, passed years ago. We lost touch when his job took him out of state. He called now, out of the blue. "Aunt Elle," he said, his voice warm and immediate. "I just found out about the fund. You started something powerful." I blinked. "You know about that?" "I made a donation yesterday, saw your name, and nearly dropped my coffee. I knew it had to be you." We talked for almost an hour. He told me about his partner, their new foster license, his plans to teach full-time after leaving corporate. He said I inspired him to believe he could pivot. "It's never too late," I said. "You told me that once when I was 10 and failing math. You said maybe math wasn't the problem, maybe the way I was being taught was." I had forgotten that moment. He hadn't. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone still warm in my hand. I realized something then. Not a lesson, but a quiet understanding. We don't always know what we're planting when we say something small and honest, but the seeds remember, and sometimes they grow in places we never expect to see again. The next morning, I made scones in the kitchenette. They weren't perfect, too flat, slightly overbaked, but they smelled like care. I wrapped a few in a napkin and brought them to the front desk. "For the cleaning crew," I said. "And for anyone else who needs something warm today." The woman behind the counter smiled. "I think that's all of us." I spent the rest of the day not chasing time, not correcting anyone's mistakes, not softening my presence to make room for someone else. I read. I wrote. I walked with nowhere to be. And it wasn't lonely. It was enough. It was raining the next morning when I woke. Not the kind that storms or hammers, but a steady, thoughtful rain, like the sky had finally stopped holding itself together. I stayed in bed a little longer, listening to it tap against the window and run in thin veins down the glass. There was something comforting about the sound, like a lullaby for women who'd survived too much silence. I had nowhere urgent to be, no appointments, no errands, so I reached for my notebook and, before my feet even hit the floor, I wrote, "There is a difference between being alone and being unclaimed. Today, I am neither." After breakfast, I called the community center. "Would you like help in the garden today?" I asked. Rain never scared Roots. The woman who answered chuckled. "You sure? It's muddy. Mud washes off. Memory doesn't." By late morning, I stood at the edge of the center's community garden, wearing my old rain boots and a waterproof jacket I found in the back of the hotel closet. My hands were bare. I liked the way damp soil felt in my palms, how it clung to the lines and ridges of age, like it respected what it touched. 2 volunteers had shown up, younger women in their 20s, unsure if they should begin or wait for direction. I introduced myself, then knelt without ceremony and began pulling weeds. Soon, they joined me. We worked in a rhythm, no leader, no lecture, just shared labor. "Were you ever a teacher?" one asked, as she loosened the dirt around a stubborn root. "Yes," I said, "in more ways than one." She smiled. "I can tell." Around noon, a child wandered over from the main building. She was maybe 7, wearing a plastic poncho, 3 sizes too big, pink rain boots speckled with cartoon cats. "Can I help?" she asked, eyes wide and sincere. "Of course," I said, scooting over, "but you have to talk to the worms first. They don't like surprises." She crouched beside me, and together we dug. I showed her how to cradle a seedling, how to press the soil gently around the stem. "My grandma died last year," she said suddenly, pressing her palms into the earth, "but I think she liked gardens too." "She still does," I said gently. "Every time something grows because of your hands, she smiles through it." The girl didn't answer. She just nodded, as if storing the thought away for later. When we were done, I sat on a low bench near the rosemary bush, watching the steam rise off the mulch and beds. My fingers were sore. My knees ached. But it was the best kind of tired. The volunteers thanked me. The little girl waved as she ran back inside, her poncho flapping like a cape. I watched her go, then closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered planting herbs alone behind Vanessa's house, not for joy, but for sanity. This time, the garden didn't just give back vegetables. It gave me my name again. On my way back to the hotel, I stopped at a bakery and picked up a fresh loaf of rosemary bread. It reminded me of something I used to bake on Sundays, back when dinners were still gatherings, not obligations. As I reached the hotel, I noticed something sitting at the front desk, a cardboard box with my name on it, in Vanessa's handwriting. I paused, hands tightening around the bread. The concierge waved me over. "Your daughter dropped it off this morning," said, "no rush to open it." I brought it upstairs and set it on the small table beside the bed. For a while I didn't open it. I just stared, watching the slow return of someone else's effort, folded into cardboard and tape. Eventually I cut it open. Inside was a bundle, wrapped in tissue, a knitted shawl in soft greens and browns, uneven in some rows, but careful, and a letter. "Mom, I didn't know what comfort looked like until I lost the comfort you gave. This isn't perfect, but I made it myself. If you ever want to come by, just for coffee, not obligation, I'd love to hear what you've been planting lately. Love, Vanessa." No demands, no defense, just a gesture. I didn't cry. But I did touch the stitches one by one, counting every uneven row like it was an apology spelled slowly, carefully. That evening, I returned to the reading room at the bookstore. Zoe was there again, already thumbing through The Secret Garden. When I arrived, "Miss Eleanor," she said, "can we read the part where they find the door?" "Yes," I said, sitting beside her. "We're all looking for a door somewhere." We read until the light began to fade. Back in my room, I wrapped the shawl around my shoulders. It was slightly scratchy, but warm in the right way. The framed photo of Richard and me sat on the bedside table, next to the sealed will and my latest journal entry. I didn't know if I'd accept Vanessa's invitation yet, but it mattered that the door she'd once slammed had quietly creaked open. And for now, that was enough. It took me a full week to decide, not because I was hesitant about seeing Vanessa again, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't walking into an old house, still filled with old air. Invitations are not always shelter. Sometimes they're traps dressed up as olive branches. But the shawl, lopsided, moss-colored and full of breath, had sat folded on the back of my chair every day since it arrived. A kind of wordless reminder that repair, if offered sincerely, doesn't always arrive polished. It arrives effort-wrinkled and late, but still worth answering. So, that Sunday, I called. "I can come by tomorrow," I told her. 1 hour, just coffee. Her voice paused before it responded. "Okay, 1 hour. I'll make sure the boys are out with Mark." "No performance," I added. "No script," she promised. I wore navy slacks, a deep burgundy sweater, and my necklace, always my necklace. I wasn't dressing for war or peace, I was dressing as myself. The walk from the curb to the front door of her house, once my house, once the structure I held together with casseroles and calendars, felt longer than it was. I knocked. Vanessa opened the door and stepped aside. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. A kettle hissed behind her on the stove. We stood there in silence for a moment, both unsure of the first thread to pull. "I almost made banana bread," she said finally. "But I remembered you hate soggy middles." "That's true," I said, walking in. "I used to pretend to like it anyway." "I know," she said quietly. The house looked the same. Mostly. Same paint, same vase I bought in Santa Fe. The throw pillows were newer, but the wear in the couch cushions still favored Mark's side. Vanessa poured the tea and handed me a mug. "I'm not going to list all my mistakes," she said, sitting down across from me. "Not because I don't want to take responsibility, but because I'm pretty sure you already did the accounting." I nodded. "I did." She looked down at her hands. "You were always there, and I acted like you came with the furniture. You treated me like wallpaper, comforting in the background, but forgettable." "I know." We sipped in silence for a while. Then she reached behind her and brought out something from a drawer, a photo. It was one I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa at 11, covered in flour, grinning as I held up a tray of cookies she had mostly burned but proudly presented. "Richard had taken it. I found this last week," she said. "It hit me how long it's been since I looked at you with joy." I didn't reach for it. I just looked. "Do you want forgiveness?" I asked gently. "No," she said. "I want understanding. And maybe permission." "For what?" "To know you again." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked, "Do you know what I did with the inheritance?" She shook her head. "I created a fund for women rebuilding late in life, for those who lost their voices serving others." Vanessa swallowed. "You didn't leave it to us." I left what was appropriate. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "I used to think that aging meant becoming irrelevant. Now I think I made you feel that way because I feared it would happen to me." "That's likely true," I said, "but it doesn't excuse the harm." "No, it doesn't." She exhaled deeply, then stood. "Come outside. There's something I want to show you." I followed her out to the backyard. It had changed. The old patchy lawn was now a modest but thriving vegetable garden. Raised beds lined with timbers. Herbs along the fence. A new bench beside the oak tree, which had grown thicker in the trunk since I last stood beneath it. "I started this last summer," Vanessa said. "After you left." She knelt and pulled a few weeds from the basil bed. "I didn't know what I was doing," she continued. "But I remembered how you used to hum when you gardened. I guess I wanted to borrow your peace." I looked around slowly. The tomatoes were staked well. The sage had already flowered. There were even strawberries. "You've done a good job," I said. She didn't respond right away. She just dug her fingers into the soil and let the dirt speak first. Then, "It's the only place I don't feel like I'm failing." I stepped beside her. "You're not failing. You're just finally tending something other than yourself." We sat on the bench for a few minutes, not talking. A breeze rustled the chimes near the back door. A robin pecked at the edge of the garden bed, and I felt, if only for a flicker, that we had paused the old cycle, not broken it entirely, but at least made room for something new to grow beside it. "I may not be your anchor anymore," I said, "but I can still be part of your roots." Vanessa reached over and took my hand. "I never deserved your steadiness," she whispered. "No," I agreed, "but you were given it anyway. Now earn the rest." When I stood to leave, She didn't follow me to the door. She stood in the garden, watching me go, the wind playing with her hair like it used to do with mine when I was young and unburdened. I walked back down the street, not as someone returning from exile, but as someone who had finally set down the weight of waiting for a thank you that would never come the right way. And in that letting go, I made space for something sturdier. The next morning, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't expect to. Reconciliation. Real, unscripted, still sore reconciliation isn't a climax. It's a series of small decisions made quietly after the audience has gone home. The conversation with Vanessa hadn't healed everything, but it stopped the bleeding, and for once, I wasn't rushing to fix the scar. I poured tea into my favorite ceramic mug, the one I'd carried from house to house, even into the hotel, and sat by the window. The city had resumed its weekday pace. People in suits walked past the bakery below, mothers with strollers and rhythm behind them. Somewhere, someone else was having the kind of day I had yesterday. That was comfort enough. I spent the morning writing, this time not in my ledger, but in a letter. Not to Vanessa, and not to Mark. Not even to the boys. It was to myself. To the woman who once forgot how to speak without softening her edges. To the girl who confused being loved with being needed. To the mother who swallowed insults because they were framed as jokes. And to the elder who finally remembered her own worth. You were never disposable. You were just too generous with your silence. I folded the letter carefully and slid it between the pages of my journal. If no one ever read it, that was fine. It wasn't meant for them. In the afternoon, I received an email from the Hale Renewal Fund Board. The scholarship program had received over 200 applications. One from a woman who'd escaped a controlling marriage in her 50s. Another from a grandmother hoping to finish her nursing degree. Each one had a story. Each one had a sentence that started with, "I thought it was too late." I replied to the board and asked if I could read some of the entries aloud during the next donor event. Not as promotion, but as proof. Proof that legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we live into while we still can. Later, I met Zoe at the bookstore. We finished The Secret Garden, and as I closed the book, she asked, "What happens after the garden is full again?" I smiled. "You tend it. Every day. Even when it rains. Especially then." She nodded solemnly and said, "You're not like other old people." I laughed. That's the best compliment I've gotten all week. Before she left, she hugged me. The kind of hug that wraps around your ribs and doesn't ask permission first. I held on a little longer than I needed to. That evening, I returned to the rooftop one last time. The sky was stained orange and lavender, the kind of sunset that feels intentional. I brought with me a shoebox, one I'd saved quietly over the years. It held a mess of things, a clipped recipe in Richard's handwriting, Vanessa's old drawing of a cat wearing a crown, a dried petal from my wedding bouquet, and a paper napkin with the words, "You're stronger than this," scrawled in my best friend's faded ink. It was time to let some of them go. Not out of bitterness, but out of readiness. One by one, I set small pieces into the portable fire pit I'd borrowed from the garden center below. The napkin burned first. Then the bouquet, then the drawing. I kept the recipe. When the flames died down to embers, I sat there in the warmth of my own memory, not haunted, not heavy, just home within myself. A quiet clarity formed. There are parts of ourselves we lend to others, willingly, blindly, lovingly, and sometimes we forget to ask for them back. But when we do, when we reclaim them, not out of anger, but out of wholeness, we begin again. Not young, not new, but rooted. The next day, I checked out of the hotel. The front desk clerk handed me an envelope. Someone dropped this off earlier. No name. Inside was a single note, written on hotel stationery, in familiar handwriting. "I don't know if I deserve you back in my life, but I'm going to try every day, as if I do. V." I folded the note and placed it in my bag beside my books, not in the trash, not in my pocket, somewhere in between. I didn't go back to Vanessa's house that day. Instead, I visited the university's Adult Learning Center. They were offering a workshop for elders interested in memoir writing. I walked in and signed up. When the woman at the desk asked for the title of my story, I hesitated, just for a moment. Then I smiled and wrote, "Wrinkled and Worth More Than You Knew." I walked out into the late morning air. It was clear, crisp, carrying the scent of coffee and promise. As I stood on the corner, waiting for the light to change, a man in a hurry brushed past me and mumbled, "Sorry, ma'am." I nodded and let him go. There had been a time I would have stepped aside faster, apologized for being in the way. But now, I knew better. I wasn't in the way. I was on my way. And that made all the difference.